Great. All right. Well, hopefully you know that I am Lauren Cook, your Dean of College and Gap Year Advising at JCHS. I'm starting my 6th year, which is very exciting. And I want to note that Rabbi Buchan is also in the room with us this morning. Hopefully you received an email a couple weeks ago noting that he's going to be working with juniors as the class dean this year. And as we work through a transition of preparing for Rabbi Kurtez's retirement at the end of this year. And so Rabbi Buchan will be taking over that work. And so wanted to sit in this morning, both to hear a little bit more about the college process and start getting familiar with those of you he doesn't know. So be aware that he's with us this morning. Happy for that. I'm going to just say a couple words here up top about the process for college advising, what you can kind of expect as we go into the fall. A couple of frequently asked questions, definitely been getting some emails from some of you with the things that feel top of mind for this time of year. Remind you of a couple of resources, some events this fall, and then just the balance of the time for whatever is on your mind at this moment. So hopefully that sounds good. I want to just note that our approach to college advising is very similar to the other independent schools in the Bay Area, where we do kind of a gentle start with juniors. We want to let students get adjusted to junior year, and being juniors, there's usually a bit of a curriculum, step up and whatnot, and have them start exploring this process a little bit independently. So right now, about 2/3 of the class seems to have signed up for a SCORE account, which is great, and that's a great tool. It looks a lot like social media where they can favorite and follow colleges and whatnot. And also attend some of the college visits to JCHS this fall. Colleges are booking furiously, so I'm getting a couple of new requests every day. So know that what's up currently on SCORE and on the college advising website is going to grow. There's probably 35 schools that have booked right now, and we'll have upwards of 70 or 80 that come to us all told. So they should be keeping an eye on that. And any schools that they end up following in SCORE, they'll automatically get pinged if that school schedules an appointment with JCHS. But no, this is a time just to collect information and do some shopping, and they don't have to. And if we have juniors in the room, I don't know if we have too many at this hour, but if you, have heard of some schools and you want to go to those visits, great. But I also want to push students to just check out places they've never heard of and types of schools. So go to a big public institution presentation, go to a small liberal arts college, go to, a more affinity school, an art school, a women's college, check out what that looks like, just to see all of the options that are out there. And when we get to December, that's the official launch of the process. And so we'll have a big college kickoff in early December, talk about framework for the spring. And after that point, a lot of furious activity. So we're going to have questionnaires to all of you, to students. I will have one-on-one meeting with all the students, have family meetings. And at that point, I'll draft more of a curated college list for them to think about, along with whatever schools they may have in SCORE that they're thinking about at this point. So at this point, I would ask that we limit actual appointments during the fall, as I need to really be focusing on the seniors, get them over the finish line to get applications in by November, December. But I'm happy to answer emails, questions you might have. And I definitely want juniors to come by my office and introduce themselves, because of course we haven't shared space, right, in a year. And so I really want to get to know your kids as best I can. And then, of course, I wanted to offer this opportunity for us to get some early questions out of the way before the intensity of the school year starts. So a couple of frequently asked questions that might be on your minds. I know I've already gotten some emails about testing, wondering about that. Should you be doing anything at this point in the process as you start junior year? And I'll just note that there were a lot of things about standardized testing that were evolving and changing prior to the pandemic, right? A lot of talk around equity and whether these tests actually are good predictors of success in college. Are they fair? And COVID has really accelerated the conversation and changes around that. So it's been the biggest disruption to the process. I know there's been some questions about what's different because of coronavirus. So it's really the ACT and the SAT that have had a big impact. There's been some impact to AP testing. Of course, there were some shenanigans a year ago spring trying to figure out if they could do them online. And subject testing has been completely axed by the College Board. But ACT and SAT testing, that's been where access has been difficult, of course, because folks weren't sure about safety and if they could social distance in rooms and all the rest. And so colleges last year went to en masse becoming test optional, and even in some instances test free. That's a phrase we're getting used to now. Before the pandemic, there were 800 some colleges and universities that were test optional. So know that there were lots of places already doing this, already used to this, but the balance really were forced to kind of be flexible. And I will say of the class of 2021, I think maybe 15 to 20% ended up having a test score at the end of the day. So it was really, really difficult to get a test. So what does this mean for you? The class of 2022, our current seniors, also dealing in a very test optional landscape. We had a lot of testing canceled last spring, and now there's a lot of pent up demand for fall testing seats. And, I had families emailing me within an hour of registration opening saying, the only thing I can get is in Ukiah or Reno. And so know that it's still, a very fraught situation, and maybe a third of the current senior class has a test score, which is unusual going into senior year. So for the class of 2023, for juniors, I have never thought it was curricularly appropriate for students to do test prep during the fall. These tests are just not meant to be taken early in junior year. So I would recommend that all of you continue with what we would have normally done, which is to not be thinking about test prep in this moment, and using the normal sequence of events that we would do. And I'll just say a couple more about why waiting makes sense. If you have a student that has a complicated learning profile, I wouldn't want to put them through stress and test prep and whatnot early, knowing that testing may very well still stay very optional for this class. We don't know if your child will need testing. We are in an environment now where the UC system and the California State University system are completely test-free. And for the UCs have declared that that will be the case through 2025. So I've got some seniors right now who are totally looking at California public schools and have decided they're just not going to try and test in this environment, which I think makes sense. There are also some private schools that have moved into a test-free environment. So some big names like Caltech, some smaller liberal arts colleges like Dickinson. So I also want to kind of wait and see how much this continues to catch on this year as schools become more confident in making decisions, with or without test scores. And then also taking a testing spot this fall or even early winter from a senior is also probably kind of a bad look to colleges, right? So the test date that your child takes the test will appear on their testing record. So I would try and leave room for seniors at this point who really are desperate to test for whatever reason, and think about doing this in kind of a normal way. So that would be to hold off on prep. JCHS will hold fall practice tests with both the SAT and the ACT, and I'll put dates up for those in a little bit here. But it's free to our families, so we always do the PSAT, and then I hold a mock ACT for juniors. And when we have those early meetings in December, that's a moment where we'll look at the scores, talk about your students' experience doing those practice tests, and then look at the schools that they're thinking about and decide what a smart testing plan might be, if they need to test, and if so, which test is going to be right for them. And then prep can really start if they're going to do some kind of prep in the winter, December, January, February, to do 1 or 2 tests in the spring and still leave room if they want to do something in the summer or fall, presuming that we have COVID sort of in the rearview mirror. So that's always the question mark as well. So that's what I want to say about testing, but I'm happy to entertain more questions in a moment if anything came up from anything I said there. So I'm going to share my screen real quick to show you 2 slides on Okay. So some resources. If you are really eager to know more about college advising and get some advice at this point in the process, I'm going to tell you that your first and best resource is the handbook. This is 32 pages that I have available for you to download on the college advising website in the portal. Goes into depth about the JCHS process. The first couple pages literally have some checklists for students in each class year about what you should be doing at different times, just to sort of stay on track with college admission. There's questions about score and about how to visit a campus and what an application is made up of. So this is a great resource. It's not something you need to sit and read all in one fell swoop. And I do send out pieces of it, as we get to points in the process where it's relevant to you and your kids. But I want to make sure that you know that that's out there. And if you want to sit down with it and read the whole thing, terrific. You're going to be much wiser for it. And then there are these two great books that have both come out within the past year. If you want to take a deeper dive into college admission and be a college admission dork like myself, The College Conversation came out during the pandemic. Two friends of mine, Eric Furta and Jacques Steinberg, wrote this. It is a little bit more geared towards parents than students, but it really takes you through the process in a very 101 kind of way. Thinks about thoughtful questions to ask, how to kind of push your kids to do some of the introspection that's necessary with the process. And then the price you pay for college, which I am almost done with. I've been reading this past week, came out earlier this year. Ron Lieber is a reporter who's been reporting on higher ed for like 20 years and has pulled together a really great resource that you can kind of read piecemeal. There's just individual short chapters on like why you should look at a women's college or, what's the FAFSA all about? But taken collectively, it also really takes you through the process. So these are three things that I would really recommend to help you feel like you can get your arms around this process, which can feel, I think, a little chaotic at different times. And then I also want to draw your attention to a couple of events this fall, and I will send these slides out too, so you have these. But college visits, as I mentioned, will be happening all throughout the fall to JCHS. And I'll just note, some will be in person. We do have reps coming to campus. They must be vaccinated. They must be masked. But then some of them will be virtual. And so I've noted on the calendar which is which, and within SCORE, kids will find the link to Zoom if it is something that is virtual. Ron Lieber is actually doing an author talk. It's being organized by University High School, but a lot of Bay Area schools are invited. So this is on September 20th, which is the Monday. It's the day before Sukkot starts. It'll be on Zoom at 4:30. I'll send out more information about that, but I think it's going to be really useful to just field a lot of questions from him and utilize his expertise about the process. Then, as I mentioned, we will do the PSAT as always. It will be during a school day, but we want to have classes since all sophomores and juniors are taking it. So that's Wednesday, October 16th. And then that mock ACT, which is optional, but I really encourage all juniors to engage in this. This is on a Sunday, November 7th. And we do try and simulate here at the school the whole testing thing of arriving to a testing center early, having your pencils, your calculator ready to go. And it's timed and proctored by our friends at Compass Education Group that do a lot of test prep with our kids. And then you get a real sort of score report that breaks everything down afterwards. And then finally, we will have our kickoff night on December 1st, which I think is a Wednesday. And it is TBA whether we will be in the theater as we would have in before times or whether we will do this on Zoom. So that's the lineup just for the next few months, so you know what's coming. And I am going to pause there, see if I can stop sharing my screen. Yeah, and see all of you again. So that was a lot, but I'm curious to know what is on your mind at this moment. You can either put things in the chat, you can unmute and ask a question or raise your Zoom hand, but I am here to try and answer any questions. Yeah, Yael.
Thanks, Ms. Cook. So can you clarify more about the testing with the UCs? So will they not be looking at test scores at all, or will some kids who have taken tests submit tests and then those will be influential in their admission or not? Or is it completely test free?
Yeah, excellent question. It is completely test-free for the ACT and the SAT. There is no function through which you can report them anymore. They are saying, please submit them after you're admitted for course placement purposes, because there are some math or foreign language things where they might need to look at those, or they want to look at those to help place. If you don't have a test score, though, I found with this year's just class that just graduated, they do have placement testing that they conduct over the summer. So if you're someone who's completely opted out of the testing, you're not like incapable of being placed in a class. What they are still taking are AP scores. And so that's something that some students may choose to do. I still make recommendations for kids around whether they submit those. Just because you've taken the class, colleges don't expect that you've taken the test or that you'll submit the score. It's not, because nationally there's just a variety of ways that AP test scores are handled. So typically students that have a 4 or 5, I'm going to say, yeah, that will help you with admission. And then, that's likely to be a test score through which you'll get an advanced placement once you're a college student. But something below that doesn't always be, it's not always value added, right? So yeah, but they literally, they don't want them. So what else? Other questions? Oh, there's lots of stuff in the chat. Let me look at the chat. Okay, I noticed the October 16th PSAT testing is on a Saturday. Oh, it's a Wednesday, the PSAT testing. So we do PSAT testing during the school day. But I will just say that the wider question about testing, yes, the SAT and the ACT for big national dates are typically on a Saturday. And in the past, in the before times, they made it really difficult for students to change their testing to be on Shabbat. You had to do paper registrations, all this sort of stuff. The pandemic, this has been a little silver lining for our kids. Suddenly, they were able to make it easy online for you to register for a Sunday. So that drove me a little crazy. But you do need to have a letter from a rabbi, which I have a letter on file for Rabbi Rubin. You just need to let me know that you need a copy of it, and I will send off, a personalized copy with your student's name on it. It's basically, verifying that they're Jewish from a third party. And so you have to upload that as a PDF when you're registering online, but then you can totally take it on a Sunday. I will say that Sunday test centers, there do tend to be slightly fewer seats. And so it is really good to plan ahead, book early, although at this point, I encourage everybody to just sort of book the registration for testing as early as possible. Next question was, can I talk a little bit about gap year programs? Absolutely. It's also in my title. So I encourage students to be looking at gap year programs all the way along. I have never heard a college admission officer say students who've taken a gap year, don't come to campus prepared. I mean, they report uniformly that students who've done a gap year arrive on college more independent, more mature, more focused, just more ready to take advantage of everything available on that campus and get the most bang for your buck, because of course it's very expensive to go to college at this point. So I would really strongly consider it. I know there are some students for whom the momentum of just kind of keep going with school, or they're thinking about multiple degrees, they want to be doctors, they know they're in for a long path with schooling, and so it might make more sense to not add that year disruption. But I think for a lot of students, it's really important to at least consider it. We do have, in a typical year, a lot of gap year visitors to JCHS. Not quite sure how we're going to handle that yet this year, but typically they start to descend on campus in November, December, January. The gap year process starts a little bit after the college admission process. So for seniors, I typically want them to focus on getting their college applications under control in the early fall, before then they have to turn their attention to gap year programs. And most private colleges and public out-of-state schools are really happy to allow for a year deferral. The UCs and the CSUs have been trickier around that. If you are looking at Cal Poly, which is a CSU, for example, generally a gap year is not going to fly. They've been pretty hard and fast about that. You can take the gap year, but then you need to apply during your gap year to a CSU campus. The UCs, will say outright they don't allow gap years, but then there's some fine print around if it's for a military or religious purpose. And I will say they don't seem to look deeply into what our kids are doing in Israel, whether you're doing a religious program or not. If you're headed to Israel, they're often going to put you in the religious box and let you do the gap year. So we've leaned into that loophole. I'll just be honest about that. So we have had a number of students in the past couple of years classes take gap years and still successfully end up the next year at UCLA or Santa Cruz or Davis or a number of campuses. So happy to talk more about that. I also have a lot of great gap year resources and know that, our JS faculty is really useful as a resource for those programs as well as our alumni. And I try and have some alumni panels each year to have folks come back and talk about their specific programs and the benefits of it. Question about how to choose between SAT or ACT. So as I said up top, I really encourage folks to take both practice tests this fall. So the PSAT is part of the school year. Ms. Bregman signs you right up. You take it with all your classmates. We get that score. And then I will be offering a mock ACT for students on November 7th. And from those two test results and experiences that the students have, we're able to start talking about which test might be best for them. And they're a little different. And if your student has learning accommodations, the accommodations granted by ACT and College Board can sometimes be a little different. So it's useful to go through this process. And if we need to bring Ms. Krieger in to consult as well, we can do that. And again, as I said up top, for some students in this landscape, they might not have to pursue testing. So we just kind of will see how things play out over the next couple of months. Question about with COVID, the status of gap year programs. I will say that the class of 2020 was surprisingly able to do a lot with gap year programs. That was a class that had, obviously COVID was hitting just as they were graduating. And it was a class that was really high in percentage of who was already planning to take a gap year before the pandemic hit. And then a couple of other kids pivoted. Most of them went ahead with their plans successfully. And there was, some quarantining and testing and all the rest, but they were able to go. And it's looking the same for 2021, but it really does depend on location. So like I know recently Israel has kind of changed some of the policies about large groups. And so depending on the type of gap year program and how the housing is set up and all the rest, some kids may have some extra hurdles to jump through. But only had one student last year that was going to go to New Zealand for a gap year program where surprisingly they actually haven't had any COVID cases, but she was just nervous about being on the other side of the globe with the pandemic starting. So she ended up finding something in Hawaii, worked on a macadamia nut farm and had a great time. So yeah, the COVID situation hasn't been too bad, it seems like for the gap year programs. There's also a question about if we took the PSAT in 10th grade, do we add the score we get for that to our score profiles? Yeah, you can, and Ms. Bregman can add the PSATs from last year, and she will do that at some point once the whole class is in score. So we do want to have your whole testing record in there if you took the PSAT last year, and then when you take it this year, it will go in there as well. And know that just to be clear about score, colleges can't see what you've put in score, right? So they can see at some point once you've applied, but the data that you're putting in there right now is for your purposes, for your parents if they sign up for an account that's attached to yours, and for me, right? So we're using this as a working tool so we all have some of the same information about what your stats look like, what colleges you're thinking about, your activities, et cetera. So don't be worried that it's like a transparent thing where colleges can see a blow by blow of what you're doing in there. We have control over what we send off to them as part of your official record. Then there's a question about, can you walk us through the optional test scores from a college admission perspective? Yes, are they less relevant than before? If that's the case, how? Yeah, so I will say, and you will hear this 100 times as we go through this process over the next 2 years, everything about college admission, it depends. It depends on the school. It depends on the size of the school. It depends on their own individual process. It would be great if in the US we had one standardized college admission process, but one of the things that is supposed to be so unique and wonderful about our process is that it's highly individualized, and schools, are each their own entities and do their own things as their own institutions. I will say generally, test optional admission has meant that, if you choose to submit scores, they are considered as something that's value added. So there are other optional parts of the process, right? Like you could choose at some places to do an interview, and then you have some personality that's brought to the paperwork. You could choose to submit an art supplement. Let's say, the student is a really strong painter or a really talented pianist. They may submit materials that show some of that, right? But they might not. And so it's now being sort of considered like a value added piece of things, but if it's not there, it's not, it's value neutral. So it's not dinging you in some way. At least that is the approach that a lot of colleges are trying to take. What it does mean, I will say the student transcript has always been the meat and potatoes of the application. So what you have taken over 4 years, what your curriculum looks like, the hopefully building rigor over your 4 years of high school, as well as your grades. Those two things are really the centerpiece and the most predictive piece in terms of how the student is going to do on a college campus. It's 4 years, right? As opposed to like 4 hours on that Saturday or Sunday morning. But without the testing, I do think more focus has shifted to the writing, and not just that longer college essay that a lot of places ask for, but the shorter supplemental questions that a lot of schools also ask for that might indicate the fit that the student has with that school. So especially private institutions, an NYU, a Tulane, a USC, they're going to be looking for not just have you done the work or your stats where we kind of want them to be, but what do you know about us and how can you demonstrate that, things about you, things that you are looking for are a good fit with what we have available on our campus. And that usually comes out most explicitly in the writing. Then of course, recommendations and activities, I think just all of those are becoming more important, have a little bit more focus on them than they did before. I will say I wouldn't be surprised once all the dust has settled with the pandemic if some of the most highly selective places, some of the Ivies, whatnot, decide to revert back to requiring test scores. It was interesting last summer to watch which schools were quick out the gate to say we can be test optional, we can be flexible, and who really kind of hung in there until August or September of 2020, before they finally made a statement. University of Michigan was a huge thorn in a lot of people's sides. It took them until early September to finally say, okay, this does seem to be like a health risk to students. So there are certain places that I think have been really attached to test scores that may eventually default back to them. And if your kids end up looking at some of those places, we might want to be thinking more seriously about trying to test, because it seems to be a value for those institutions. And again, I can speak anecdotally about what a handful of those places are. But there's been a lot of podcasts and NPR reports and interviews with admission deans over the past year talking about what it's been like to make this sudden shift. And the majority of them have been pleasantly surprised about how they didn't really need the test scores to make a good fit. And I will say that a lot of schools were transparent this past spring as they released their stats for the year of admitted students. I got a lot of emails saying like, so in the end, 79% of our applicant pool didn't have a test score, and 78% of our admitted students didn't have a test score. So they were very much trying to, send messages that we were, making fair decisions. And it wasn't like 20% of our admitted students, didn't have a test score, that they just totally went all in on the kids that were able to test. So, but I'll keep you posted. And I usually try and bring a guest speaker in for our kickoff in December, who's a testing expert, to give us this is what's happening at this moment and a sense of the landscape, so that we're all feeling fully armed going into the process. All right, I'm going to check back in the chat. I don't see on SCORE any graph of statistics where previous JCHS students were admitted. Okay, so let me just let you know that in SCORE, and we'll do a bit more of an orientation to SCORE as we get into the fall, with each college, there may or may not be a scattergram of what has happened with JCHS history. And it's a very blunt instrument. If you click on, Tulane and then click on, I think it says graph, or in other areas it says scattergram, you're gonna get a GPA and a test score access. And you can toggle it between ACT or SAT. And then it literally plots on there anonymously, green dots of kids that got in, yellow dots of folks that were waitlisted if the school waitlists people, and red triangles, I think, of those who did not get in. It is a blunt instrument. It is useful in just giving you a sense of like, am I anywhere even in the ballpark? But they bump up against a usefulness with a school our size, depending on the institution. So the Tulane scattergram, the UCLA scattergram, those are going to be very helpful. There will be millions of dots in there. They are very much applied to and attended by our students. Carleton College, which is an amazing school just outside Minneapolis, small liberal arts college, we've had one student attend in the last 15 years. And so if there are under 5 applicants, it's not going to give you any data because, again, we're small, and I'm really trying to not have everybody be like, oh, that must have been so-and-so's test scores. To the question, if there's not a scattergram appearing, it may be because there's just not enough data to give you anything useful on that. And that's where national stats are going to be more helpful. But we'll talk more one-on-one about predictions of admission and all of that. And next summer, I will be putting those on your kids' college lists so that they have some kind of sense of what's a reach for me, what's possible, what's a likely school, so that the list ends up being balanced and we're not just doing total moonshots or total safeties, right? We want to have a real mix of things. There's also a question in the chat about once the choice of schools is narrowed, will JCHS provide any support with applications essay writing? 100%, that is my job. So I have a very full inbox right now of seniors that are sharing essays with me. And we start that process at the end of junior year. So in your junior English classes, whatever English class you're in, typically late April, early May, it is the last assignment of the year for juniors to draft a common application essay. And we use the common application essay because almost everyone's going to apply to at least one common application school. It is, as it sounds, an application that's common across almost 1,000 schools at this point, private and public, all around the world. And so this is the chance to start writing in the first person, writing about yourself. I think it can feel very awkward for some students the first time they do it. So we do it in a safe space of, the English teacher and I, read it and give some feedback. And I work with classes on that. I come in and talk a little bit about what we're aiming for, and they look at examples and all the rest. And then hopefully they spend some of the summer after junior year either tweaking, editing, working on that initial topic, or scrapping it now that they've tried one and didn't love it, and starting something new. But it's always my goal that a lot of students have that essay, that big standard essay, in pretty good shape by the end of the summer. Not everybody does, of course, and that's fine. But just this past Monday, we had a workshop at school that's, again, optional, but I do this every year in the middle of August, right when theater and athletic rehearsals and all of that are starting again. So hopefully most folks are back. But I bring in college admission reps. We had 6 reps here on Monday, and they met with students individually and read any essay work that they had and just gave them some feedback on it, from an admission counselor's perspective, or they could do a mock interview or both with reps. So this was just to kind of help them start locking back into the process, thinking about, oh yes, I'm applying to college. I'm about to meet with some reps this fall. And so it's, again, like a low stakes opportunity. They didn't have to want to go to any of these schools, although there were some reps here that certain people were excited about. It's just literally practice for everybody. And then, yeah, I do a lot of polishing, revising with students throughout the fall of all of their writing and their senior year English teachers are available to read stuff one-off as well and help them. In terms of applications, again, absolutely. So I have started another pandemic brainstorm, making videos of completing applications for students. So the seniors have just received 4 very short Common App application videos where I literally go share my screen and go through the application, give them tips on how to answer certain areas. And I never want a student to apply to a college without me having reviewed a PDF of the entire application. So I'll be doing another set of videos for the UCs probably this weekend. And then I will have a lot of open drop-in hours after school and during some of our new flex blocks this fall for seniors to just come in and talk to me about whatever specific issues, problems, because there's always, if a student transferred, if they took a college class, just trying to figure out how to input, the less generic scenarios. So, but yes, I do extensive support with applications, and I definitely want students to be seeking me out for all of that. Also a question, if a student is thinking about a gap year, do you still suggest students apply for colleges? Yes. So I strongly believe that regardless of what you're thinking about a gap year, go through the process with your peers if you are thinking that college is going to be on the horizon at some point. And I would also say this is true for folks thinking about the IDF. I would, in the spring of junior year, so next spring, we'll start talking about recommendation letters from faculty members, making requests for those, and then those letters actually get written during the fall. Even if a student is not applying to college senior year, I will keep those on file and know that, alumni have access to me or whoever is in the college advising role sort of in perpetuity. So every year I have folks that come back to me, either they're on their gap year and they've changed their mind, they just got out of the IDF, they want to transfer, it wasn't the right fit. And so we keep all of these records for whenever it is useful to be sending them out. And to also practice writing the college essay with their peers and all the rest. I would rather keep all the doors open for as long as we can, and then make that final decision about shutting it, whether it's not applying actually in senior year. But, something like with the UC schools, it's a long application. And so if a student is sitting with me in senior year, completing it and just saves it as a PDF to their desktop, and then they can go have adventures, and a year or two later can return to that PDF and remember how to enter a lot of the information about JCHS. So I would just use the support while it's here, and you're still in the school community and everybody's kind of on that same path. All right, that was a good run of questions. Is the GPA we're typing into SCORE from last year or this year? Don't type a GPA into SCORE yet. Ms. Bregman will enter your GPA next year. So next summer, once we have your cumulative GPA from freshman, sophomore, and junior year. And I actually think students can't put a GPA in SCORE, but I'll have to check and look on that setting because we always want to compare apples to apples. So the GPAs that you're seeing on the scattergrams are the GPAs that students put on their college application, which is a combination of freshman through junior year. So it's the cumulative average of all of those. So right now, juniors are halfway through their college experience, not 3/4 of the way through. So we want to wait and see what we get this year. And especially if you've got some honors or AP courses in your curriculum, that GPA is going to get a nice bump if you do well this year from the sort of weighting of those classes. And so, we'll leave the GPAs out for now. Any thoughts on the California Community College Transfer Program? Yes, the TAG program, the Transfer Admission Guarantee. So let's not forget that we have one of the best community college systems in the country, 123 campuses around California. We do have a transfer admission guarantee program at all of those schools with, I believe it's 5 of the UCs, and then some preference in the process at the remaining UCs. And of course, it's the very most selective ones where there's not an admission guarantee. So UCLA, Cal, I think San Diego. But if you get yourself in the TAG program, Transfer Admission Guarantee. You have an advisor on that campus, on the community college campus, that is helping you on a certain path that is laid out for you of getting your general education requirements with certain GPA, that if you follow that particular path, you then have a guarantee to, you know, if it's Davis you want to go to or Santa Cruz, you need to pick one campus that's your goal. And then you transition there junior and senior year. Your degree comes from that UC. There's no asterisk saying you spend half your time at a community college, and you have saved a tremendous amount of money. And you receive preference if you're interested in Berkeley or UCLA or whatnot. There is a state mandate that's actually in the legislation that a certain number of admitted students to UC campuses each year must be transfer students. And I know that most of the UC campuses are putting their thumb on the scale for transfer students coming from community colleges. So at Berkeley, for example, I'm good friends with the transfer admission coordinator there. You know, she tells me almost every year, 95% of their transfer admits are coming from community colleges. So you may be thinking, well, Lauren, this sounds too good to be true. Or just sending my kid to a community college. I will say there are things to consider about community college enrollment. You are with everyone, right? So you are with adult learners, you are with folks who bombed high school, you are with folks taking one-off classes like, you know, our students during the pandemic last summer. A lot of folks took community college classes online. And so the peer culture is really diffuse. In terms of, you know, self-motivation and all of that. If you have a student or you are a student that needs some of that, you know, study group energy and folks that are really motivated around you, you might have a grab bag, right, around you. And so I think it works best for the people who are really self-motivated and independent and driven and know that they can keep themselves on this path. There also may or may not be much of a sense of community, right? And so you lose some of the clubs or organization kind of things. You certainly lose, in most cases, although not all, the residential component. You would have those first 2 years of college. So, so it depends on how important that is to you or your family. And you know, funding varies. And so if you're at a community college for 2 years and you can get into all the classes that you want to take and your major and area concentration is there and stays funded, terrific. But, you know, budget issues happen. You know, I'm pleased to see that in the last year or two, the state of California seems to be reinvesting in higher education, but there's been a steady defunding of it by the state over the last 10 or 15 years. That's why the UCs have gone up so much in cost. You could end up at a community college for 3 years trying to get all those credits done, or 4 years, or, you know, you might transfer to a private institution and find out you need to stay there for 3 years instead of 2. So the cost savings, right, there's an asterisk there. It's not a guarantee that it's going to just be this sort of cheaper route for 2 years. That's if everything falls in place. So just things to consider. Ron Lieber, in the book I mentioned earlier, The Price You Pay for College, has a whole great chapter about community college and just like the pros and cons and things to consider in that book. Just finished that on like Tuesday night. So, so I would weigh all the options before going great guns into that. But we do have, you know, a couple of seniors in the class of 2021 that have chosen this route purposefully. They did the college application search. They got into some four-year colleges, but were really intent on particular UCs and have decided the TAG program is going to get them on the path they want to be on fastest. So, so yeah. All right. See, it's 8:45. Just name that. So appreciate everyone hanging in. I feel like I'm just barreling information at you. I'll say if anyone wants to actually throw their voice in the room and unmute and ask a question, go for it, or use the chat if there's anything else. But we've covered a lot of ground here. All right, well, I will say I'm going to send some information to everyone about the JCHS college visits, probably end of next week, just a couple of more things about why these are things you want to go to. Start broaching the topic of demonstrated interest. So this is a thing in the college search. Not every college cares about it, but some very much care about it. I would name Tulane as one of them. And it means exactly what it sounds like. You are demonstrating interest in that institution. So colleges will track, have you been on an online tour? Have you gone to one of these rep visits? Did you open an email? I mean, they're looking at all of this sort of stuff. And the more of these things you rack up, the better your chances of admission are, because they see it as you are really excited about our institution. You have demonstrated a lot of interest in us. It can be a little annoying because, you know, you got to sit there and like open every email that comes from a school you like, but an easy way to get one of those, you know, sort of check marks is to come to a JCHS college visit. Whether that is physically in room 120 or online. They collect your name and information and all of that. And of course, you're learning something about the college. Know that I am always in these visits. I know there are some juniors that might not feel ready to like sit down one-on-one with a college rep and have a conversation. And that's okay, because that's not what they're doing, right? They will often be in a group. There will often be seniors there who have done this for a year already and know exactly what they want to ask. And if there's dead space, I will fill it in with some questions. And so if they want to just passively take in the experience, it's totally fine. And if they also have questions and want to jump in, terrific. And it helps me sort of get to know them and the things they're interested in. But I would really encourage them to do a handful of these. So I'll be sending out more information about that. You can RSVP on SCORE. So I have a sense of who's coming. And you have to let faculty know 24 hours in advance that you're going to miss class. So there's a very low tolerance for the email 5 minutes before class begins. Maybe the first day or two of visits, but then that's not going to fly. So so we do need to be planning ahead. I don't want faculty yelling at me because so many kids have less class. And we also, you know, need to help them plan a little bit. There's sometimes if UCLA comes, 30 kids go to that visit and suddenly AP biology has no one in class. So so it's good if we know that a day in advance, and faculty definitely try and be flexible and let you attend these. So sometimes juniors say like, Ms. Cook, can you recommend to me which ones I should go to? And yes, I can try to, but I don't really know you very well yet. So so if you have that request, the student or the parent should shoot me an email and say, I'm kind of interested in STEM. I'm open to the whole country. You know, if there's a couple of things that you might think are kind of in your wheelhouse at this point, that will give me a bit of information to kind of narrow in on. But generally right now you're shopping. So go shop and just try out some different things. And we will narrow in our focus a little bit more as we get into the winter. Because you don't know what you don't know. You might think at this moment, well, I have to go to Brandeis, but you don't know that Tulane exists, and maybe, you know, so check out some strangers to you as well. All right, I'll do a last call for questions. Any last burning things on your mind? All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for being up bright and early to sit in on this before school's even started. Love seeing a handful of students in the room. So you get the early gold stars on the college advising process. And remember, I am here for you, mostly virtually in this moment, but we have so much one-on-one FaceTime coming, and I'm really looking forward to getting to know all of you. And yeah, best wishes for the start of the school year.